real William Wallace title came from all the different meanings that the research participants bestowed on William Wallace, not because I'm an M&M fan. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit about the research that I conducted last year and the findings of that particular research. I've always been really interested in stories and storytelling and how people tell stories to others and to themselves. And more specifically, I'm interested in stories that help people communicate a particular type of identity. So following the £1 million refurbishment in 2019, I was inspired to conduct this research as I had read that the story of William Wallace would be told better than it had ever been told before. And I wondered how this story was going to be better and how tourists would interpret the story they were going to be told. So with permission, from April to October last year, I used a variety of ways to understand the creation of the story of William Wallace at the National Wallace Monument and how it was interpreted and retold by those who were experiencing it. So this involved interviews with the cultural producers, so the staff and volunteers, as well as the tourists and those with membership that was quite interested in capturing the views of repeat visitors. I also conducted some observation, also known as systematic lurking, to better understand the spirit of Wallace, his bravery, the physical landscape, as well as the importance of the Battle of Stirling Bridge. So how a story is told means that there will be different responses from the audience. Stories can emphasise the cultural or the ideological or reflect the hopes and the desires and the expectations of the audience. And how visually appealing a story is can also make it more engaging and the meaning that they were given. The research was designed so that the participants could share their own stories in their own words. There was only an opening question that asked individuals about their experiences of their last visit to the National Wallace Monument, and staff and volunteers were simply asked about their experience of telling the story of William Wallace. I then analysed these stories using a narrative analysis, and it revealed in what ways the images and roles that have been bestowed on William Wallace reflect a national or individual identity. And broadly, the findings reveal the story of William Wallace as family, as a symbol, and as Braveheart. And we'll look at these in turn. So Wallace's family, this shows that Wallace's family illustrates both implicit and explicit connections. Stories offered shared very specific associations with Wallace through what are known as fixed markers of national identity. So these would include the name and lineage, as well as those with more fluid ties to Scotland. There was even a story of a participant who had named their child after the supposed wife of Wallace in the Braveheart movie. So people feel very passionately about this movie, as David has illustrated. As the notion of family is becoming more fluid and increasing emphasis and interest in a broader sense of family as community, this may begin to explain why Wallace is often represented in stories that bring families closer together, including those who don't necessarily have Scottish ancestry. So, for example, while tourists have a number of motivations to visit historic sites and monuments, curiosity, part of a tour, educational interest in film, a more unusual reason to attend is to get engaged or to get married. So stories told by staff and volunteers often reflected not only how such occasions were special for those getting engaged or married, but also for those taking part. Stories illustrated that couples want that Wallace association and a foundation on which to build their lives together. One participant expanded on their experience of a couple who lived in England but married at the National Wallace Monument. And she said, the wedding was really beautiful. They got married on the Crown, which is amazing, and it was very special. We didn't have any guests. The witnesses were 2 members of our staff as well, so we all felt very special as part of that day. They've come back every year on their anniversary and have written some lovely letters to us. So this underscoring of repeat visits every year and the developing and maintaining of a relationship with monument staff through the writing of letters shows how the National Wallace Monument connects couples and staff, and they are now forever part of that story of others. Stories also show the significance of Wallace to families is not only centred on visits to the monument. So one of the participants noticed during the refurbishment the following. She said, when the statue of William Wallace was refurbished in 2019 and it was posted on social media, we got this story from someone saying that their grandfather was involved in the statue coming to the monument in the first place. He brought the statue from the port that it got dropped off at and brought it up to the monument. His reward is to keep the cloth and that the statue was wrapped in, and apparently he turned that cloth into a suit and wore it for many years. So a very important way of connecting families, being a part of a wider community that is still associated with Wallace. There were also quite a few stories about Wallace as a symbol, and these stories related to tangible and intangible symbols associated with William Wallace. Perhaps not surprisingly, Wallace's sword featured in many of these stories and often reflected overcoming adversity. As one of the participants explained, this tangible artefact is very significant in the telling of the story of William Wallace. She said the sword is important as a symbol of war, but it is also a symbol because of its size. It is romantic because in order to wield the sword, Wallace would need to be at least 6 feet tall. Edward I, or Longshanks, was the nemesis of Wallace, so people like to think that they were equally pitted against one another. In this way, the sword represents the physicality of Wallace. So in this story, the protagonist is Wallace, reflecting the desires and the hopes of a nation through thematic components, in addition to be showing as visually appealing. And this is conveyed through the romantic image bestowed on the character of Wallace, that is his height, as well as the sword itself. The sword also appears in other stories, offering a connection to Wallace, even though the cause is one that's unrelated to communicating a national identity. As Sean, who is a member of the Wallace Monument, discussed, he said one of the stories about Wallace Monument was when I was there with several women in a group. They were American and they didn't really know anything about Wallace. I told them about the suffragettes breaking the cabinet, smashing the glass, containing the Wallace sword to bring attention to their cause in 1912. The Americans loved that story. It ties into freedom, but it also makes Wallace relevant for them as women. So this story shows how individual experience is important for tourism. And while it includes the tangible symbol of the William Wallace sword, the intangible spirit and the determination of Wallace's character has been transposed to the suffragettes and now to these tourists who were in the group. This is a factual and symbolic story of challenging oppression, but also in its retelling is designed to transform the perspective of those visiting the monument. And by offering a way in which the story can be given individual meaning, the sword and what it represents provides an opportunity for a more transformative tourist experience. Of course, there were lots of stories about Braveheart, and how for some tourists Braveheart made William Wallace come alive. Although domestic tourists were generally aware of the factual inconsistencies of the music, And here I have a picture that I've badly taken of a beautiful curved screen that now features in the National Wallace Monument of people going across the bridge, Stirling Bridge, which doesn't necessarily feature in the Braveheart movie. Their stories reflected the importance of the global appeal of the film, including educating others about William Wallace, but also in underscoring the significance of Wallace's story to Scotland's national identity. International tourists were not always able to distinguish between William Wallace and Braveheart, and consequently William Wallace was subject to their own stories and reconstructions to a greater extent than the domestic tourists. The following is a story of inspiration told by one of the cultural producers to show how watching the Braveheart movie has motivated tourists to travel to the National Wallace Monument. For this particular tourist, there have been notable challenges to overcome in the process. The story goes. I remember years ago when I hadn't been here that long, and it was a young Brazilian boy, and he was about 19. And he'd been saving up for 5 years since he saw the film just to come to the National Wallace Monument. He was here all day. And when I said to him, "Have you enjoyed it?" he told us he was going straight home to save up again. And he wasn't wealthy, but he was going to save up again to come back. And I thought, my God, passion. In years gone by, it was looked down upon the film, but not now. Attitudes have changed, and the people in charge are more embracing of the film. We even mention it in some of our displays and things like that because it's important to us. The importance of the retelling of this story is threefold. Firstly, the story shows the significance of the film in introducing William Wallace to a global audience and its emotional impact on an individual who otherwise would not have embarked on this quest to visit the National Wallace Monument. Secondly, it shows the interdependency between the building, the emotional connection, and individual values. Thirdly, perceptions of the film have evolved in the preceding 25 years. Following some initial criticism for the reproduction of Wallace's Braveheart, a more positive outlook has developed as the film can offer an opportunity to re-educate. This is not only reflected in the story retold by the cultural producer, but also in a story relayed by a domestic participant. He says, "Braveheart, you can say what you like about it. It brought Wallace to the people, and I would probably say 40% of the Scottish population, and that's probably me being positive, knew who Wallace was before Braveheart came out. Everybody knows who Wallace was and why he is so important to Scotland. I was in Moldova years ago watching Scotland playing football, getting involved in a conversation with a Moldovan guy who'd watched Braveheart, and he wanted to know the true story. So I told him, and that's in Moldova." The theme of this Braveheart-related tale is one of education and learning. There is recognition that the movie has not always been well received, with the caveat you can say what you like about it. This means that although there has been some criticism of the film, this is somewhat outweighed by the many benefits that it's brought to Scotland. This time, the protagonist in the story is the tourist himself, who adopts the role of educator. However, Braveheart, and especially the American actor who played the role, is not universal by the local residents, as explained by another participant. He says, "Occasionally I hear people saying, 'What's happened to the statue of Mel Gibson? It used to stand here at the National Wallace Monument in the car park. After the film came out, someone produced this statue, which was actually Mel Gibson and not William Wallace. And it stayed in the car park for probably about a year,'" and he laughed. He says, "But apparently right from the word go, a lot of people didn't like it, because obviously it was just Mel Gibson. It wasn't William Wallace. So eventually the management had to say to the person who had gifted it, 'Can you take it away, please?' Because they had to put a cage around it to stop people vandalising it." So the story illustrates that borders have been drawn by local residents. William Wallace is a Scottish and not an American national hero. So, to sum up then, the research showed the collective and individual meaning of the stories of and associated with William Wallace, and the importance of these in conveying identities. Tourists often feature in the stories told by staff and volunteers that underscore the importance of William Wallace to a wider audience. The research also showed the continuities of tourism, and more specifically William Wallace, with everyday life. So things like names, weddings, clothing, challenges. And finally, and probably most importantly, these multiple different perspectives do not detract from the collective memory of William Wallace. And that's all I've got to say.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Professor Tinson, for sharing the results of your systematic working. I'm going to use that phrase in the future. And the many fascinating opinions and stories that you managed to canvass. We've been really fortunate tonight. We've had an insight into Wallace, into the film Braveheart, and into how the story of Scotland's national hero is told today, 25 years after the blockbuster movie first hit the screens. That movie told the story of a man who's prepared to stand up to discrimination and injustice. And whilst it might be 715 years now since Wallace suffered the cruel death depicted in the closing scenes of the film, that story is still a source of inspiration today. For helping us to understand it even better, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to this evening's speakers, to David, and to Julie for generously sharing with us your time and your wisdom. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you to you for joining us this evening. To have you with us, I hope you'll have a chance to visit the National Wallace Monument in the future. Until then, good night.